Hello, I'm Ralph Wilson, National Recreation Specialist for the Soil Conservation Service in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Roger Brown, Director of Parks and Recreation for the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, and I have the pleasure and the privilege this morning of talking with Dr. Edith L. Ball, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies at New York University. Edith, you've been a leader in the recreation and park profession for as long as I can remember, even though you don't look a day older than you did when I first met you over 30 years ago. You have obviously seen and heard a great deal over the years that you've been involved in this profession. When and where did you first become involved in the recreation profession, and what caused or motivated you to select such a career? I wonder if you'd mind briefly charting or outlining the course of your distinguished career for us.
I guess I'd have to start back a little bit further. I was born and brought up in New York City, went to the public schools. And I guess it was in my home that I had the first motivation for participation in this particular field, with parents who encouraged us to bring friends to our home for many activities, parties, and so forth, who helped us to learn sports. My father was an athlete, taught us to sail, to swim, and other kinds of things of that kind, which would be the kind of thing that one would do in the New York City area. I went to Teachers College, Columbia, for my college work to start with, getting a B.S. in health and physical education with a major interest in dance and sports. And then went out into the field. And I started teaching health and physical education, first in the Orange YWCA, concentrating on dance, then moved into college teaching, doing corrective physical education at Teachers College, went to Kent State, then went back to Teachers College with a thought that I might get a doctorate in health education, but instead just stayed a year and did coursework to give me more orientation to that field. Then went to the University of Maryland, from there to Western Reserve University in the School of Nursing, which was a rather unusual position. I am not a nurse, but I had the opportunity to work both with students and the staff of the university hospital. And out of that grew the whole interest, I guess the first interest that I had, in the whole field of working with patients and using recreation as a means of motivating them to a will to live, which with severely handicapped persons is the first thing that one has to look at. We used our students to carry on the program, and the first programs that we did in University Hospital in Cleveland was with surgery patients. Then we moved into Children's Hospital and started a whole program there. When they reorganized the school, I decided once again that it was time for me to think about going to work for a doctorate. This is kind of a refrain, I guess. I went to Teachers College and enrolled for summer session, but I had an unusual opportunity to go to Maryland as a state supervisor of recreation under WPA. The general feeling at Teachers College was go and have a real experience, but come back in the fall. And I stayed for 7 years and then moved on from there into other administrative jobs and counseling as well. My first movement away was at the beginning of the war, and I worked partially with Federal Security Agency in a more or less of a consultant capacity, trying to find places where in the state of Maryland and Delaware we could put USO buildings. I've waded through marshes and all the rest to decide whether this was a place for a USO building. Having been at War Department, then after that as an employee counselor, In the midst of the war, you didn't move too fast, but I finally moved into Office of Residence Halls, which were a dormitory arrangement for women working in Washington. And they were brought in from everywhere. We had 12 dormitories at 4 locations with 4 recreation buildings, 1 at each, and with 12,000 women to serve with some type of recreation program. And this was a real challenge. And at the end of that time, in 1947, I had the choice of either trying to stay in government or to move elsewhere, and I decided once again that a doctorate was important. And I had the opportunity to go to New York as executive director of a settlement house on the Lower East Side of New York, and then really did start and finish the doctorate at that time. And then was asked to come to stay at NYU, where I had decided I would get the doctorate as an instructor, and then moved on from there, from that time, which was 1950 until 1973, moving from instructor to a professor in the usual course of academia. Now that's kind of a background there. And from there, you'd have to kind of say, well, that was a beginning of a different kind of exposure, because my major interest then was teaching. But I was still involved with many other activities.
Edith, could you tell us something about your involvement with some of the organizations that have been very prominent in the development of our profession?
Yes, I think that in terms of organizations, I first started out doing some work with organizations with the American Association of Health, Physical Education, Recreation, both on the local and the state level. Then, when I was with WPA between the years of 1931, 1937, or 37 to 43, I guess it was, there was quite a movement for recreation workers who were employed in WPA to formulate some kind of an organization. Edward Lindemann, an outstanding person in adult education, was the primary mover in that particular development. And Recreation Workers of America was formed at that time, and then moved on, and I guess it was somewhat later when there was a movement to form a professional organization. And I can't remember the first name. Professional Recreation Workers? No. But anyway, it became the American Recreation Society. And that was formulated on a local, state, national level. And I started working with many different groups there, and then moved on into, I guess I went through the ranks from secretary to first vice president to president-elect to president of American Recreation Society, and was in that position, I guess as president-elect, when we first started, it must have been about 1962, when we first started to talk with some definitive action in mind about a merger of the several organizations in the field of recreation.
Edith, who were some of the individuals, particularly during your early career, who had the greatest influence or impact upon the course of your own personal career?
Well, that goes back, way back, because when I was a young student at Teachers College, I attended a convention, and J.B. Nash was one of the major speakers. And I guess from that time, in 1924, he was really the inspiration for a great deal of my work and the things that I did, and really was the reason why I finally decided on getting my doctorate degree at New York University.
So you say Dr. Nash then was the one...
Was the major person.
influence.
Of course, other people tangentially, I suppose, influenced, but I always considered that he was the person that really made me motivated to go into this particular field.
Mm-hmm. Edith, among the many facets of the recreation park movement with which you've been particularly and specifically identified are therapeutic recreation, professional recreation education, and accreditation of recreation and park curricula. Could you tell us something about your personal involvement in the development of what we know today as therapeutic recreation?
Well, as I indicated before, when I was at Western Reserve between 1931 and 37, we did start programs with patients there. Then, when I was working for WPA, I had the opportunity to develop programs in the hospitals in Maryland, as well as in other types of institutions. For instance, homes for the elderly. We had homes in Baltimore and some of the other places. And there, we tried to develop programs that would be a diversion for the people in those institutions, but at the same time would contribute to their total treatment program. And those types of programs have gone on and developed further and further until now we have prescriptive programs and we have diversional programs. And in general, my own particular philosophy in this is that we have programs that move from mere exposure to activity to recreation education, where we try to help people to learn the skills and attitudes that will permit them to participate, then to a real therapeutic program in which there are guided choices, and with the hope that finally they will have had enough experience to be able to plan their own recreative experiences which will contribute to their total living. That is one type of program in which I have been quite considerably involved, currently serving on the National Therapeutic Recreation Board. And a second area in which I became interested, because I had been doing social work and had done counseling both in the War Department and then, of course, as executive of a private agency, I did a lot in the whole social work field and began to see that if we were really going to do something to help people to make wide choices, that we needed to do something about leisure counseling. And as a result, I did introduce a course at New York University, which was the first course that was taught in this country in the field of leisure counseling. During all my years at New York University, I was very much concerned with the whole area of quality of personnel whom we were putting out into the field to conduct the delivery of services. And as a result, when I was working with American Recreation Society, I did serve on the Professional Development Committee. And out of that Professional Development Committee, we decided that it was necessary to develop a program of standards leading to accreditation of the recreation and park programs in colleges and universities. We started working on that somewhere around early 60s and first worked under ARS jurisdiction, and then the Federation of Professional Organizations for Recreation took this whole project under its wing and helped us with funding, helped us to get funding, and we became a separate unit for the development of an accreditation program for parks and recreation. We worked on it from that time until our first presentation to the National Council on Accrediting in 1972. And they were not enthusiastic and did not approve our program at that time. Then it was a question of how would we go. And finally it was decided that we would move into an in-house accreditation program. That program was started in 1975, and it is now going strong. I'm not quite sure of the number that have been accredited at this time. There are quite a few who are presenting their programs for accreditation at this Congress. I believe the last figure I heard was that there were somewhere between 25 and 30 that had already been accredited, and there may be more now as a result of these hearings here at this Congress.
Edith, you've mentioned your involvement with the therapeutic development in our field and with the accreditation role, which Ralph had indicated was two of the three areas that you've been most associated with and identified with. The third one obviously leaves to be the area of education. You've been recognized as one of our top educators in the leisure movement and throughout these years. And I wonder now that we've seen such a proliferation of colleges and universities throughout the country moving into this area, what do you see in this area of education, and could you tell us a little bit about your role in the educational part of our field?
Well, I think that one of the things that is important to remember is that the recreation programs in colleges and universities really grew out of departments of physical education. And there has been a real problem in relation to this because some of the people who were teaching the courses in the colleges did not have a wide recreation background, and therefore it was questionable about their own qualifications for teaching these kinds of courses. So that's a good part of our thrust has been to establish standards for the college programs, and this is really the whole essence of the accreditation program, is to establish standards which say the people who graduate from this program are qualified. Now, we have a long way to go. We have some 300 and some odd college programs. And as I said a few minutes ago, we have somewhere around 30 that have been accredited. There are many problems in relation to this. One of them in accreditation is financial, because the colleges must pay for the accreditation process. And with the real economic difficulties that colleges are having today, their ability to pay somewhere $5,000, $10,000 to have an accreditation team visit them and then have themselves go through the whole process of developing a self-study, which means that they have to have some release time for staff to do this because the volumes are about this thick, and that takes time to do, and that takes money. So that we have a real problem of how we can go on and have qualified programs come into the accreditation program, and therefore can say the people who graduate from these programs are qualified. If they do not graduate from this kind of program, then we question their qualifications, and it's kind of buyer beware thing.
Edith, you are a former president of the American Recreation Society and a distinguished fellow of that organization. You made a reference a few moments ago to some of the early talks relative to what eventually became a merger of a number of national organizations, including the American Recreation Society, and culminated in what we know today as the National Recreation Park Association. You, I believe, served as vice chairman of a special merger committee under Dr. Luther Gulick of the Institute of Public Administration in New York in some of the early stages of that merger negotiation. Could you tell us a little bit about some of your personal recollections and involvement in that memorable event that perhaps some of us are not aware of?
Well, we had been talking about it for quite some time, off and on, in American Recreation Society. And American Institute of Park Executives had been doing the same thing. So that there came a time when it looked as if there ought to be some formalization of some of this talking. And therefore, there was a kind of recognition that something had to get started. And my first recollection of this is when we were having a meeting in New York, and it was while Bill Frederickson was president and I was president-elect. And Joe Prendergast from National Recreation Association suggested after the meeting, come on over to my house and let's sit down and talk about this. And we talked. And we decided that really something formal in terms of merger should be developed. And so that's when the first task, after that, was when the first task force was formed with Luther Gulick as chairman. I was vice chairman, and there were representatives from the various organizations. We moved on from there. Many setbacks, many controversies, many times when we thought the whole thing was going to completely fail. But then finally, with another committee that was formed later, the culmination was in 1965, the formation of National Recreation Park Association.
And you, I believe, were a charter trustee of the association,
Yes.
Were you not?
Yes.
As you look back over your career, Edith, one that has been for such a long period of time and so instrumental and worthwhile for so many ways in our profession, what are some of the benchmarks or highlights of your career that you would point to that you could tell us about?
Well, I think the ones that I've already mentioned, I would consider some of the major ones. That is the development, for instance, of therapeutic recreation. In my particular case, I was able to develop a curriculum in therapeutic recreation at New York University. We taught our first courses there in 1953, and then right beyond that, out of those first courses, we then decided that the time was right for the development of the therapeutic recreation specialization at the master's level. And our belief has been all the way through that at the undergraduate level, the student should have a broad exposure to the whole field of recreation with the opportunity for at least an exploration in whatever area of interest he might have. But that real specialization would come at the master's level. And then when we finally moved into a doctoral program, our basic philosophy was that where you started out broadly, you developed a specialty, and then using that, you looked at all of the perspectives of the thing when you were working on a doctoral level. And I can remember my own graduation from Teachers College when Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia University, said, "A specialist is a broad person sharpened to a point." which I think tells us a lot. And I think this is what, in education, I have considered a basic philosophy, that we needed to have breadth and then depth, and then the broad scope of the entire field would come at a later time as we developed through both education and experience.
As the, if we could go back to for a moment to the merger of the various organizations that formed NRPA, you indicated that might be one of the major highlights as you've seen our development of the field. How do you feel about that merger after about 16 years of maturing now? And is that something that that you would classify as kind of the top thing that has happened in our field in recent years to really promote it?
I think it is, from many standpoints, because it has presented, at least to an extent, something of a unified approach to this important area of living. And that is that people have moved together to try to develop an awareness of the effect that leisure experiences have on people in their whole total living experience, and that you balance what you do in leisure and what you do in work, and the extent to which these things work out together, develop a total personality.
What do you see as some of the major changes or problems facing our profession during, say, the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, one of them, I would certainly say, relates to the whole idea of the merged organization and the extent to which, at this particular point, we really need to think about looking at our structure to define whether this is the most viable one for two things, which is part of the whole idea of the merger. First of all, the development of professionalism, which was part of the idea of bringing the professional groups together, but at the same time, the idea of advocacy for the development of the importance of leisure in the lives of people. I think these are two facets of our total organization. And I think where at one time we thought our current structure would be the most viable for the development of these two ideas, after 16 years we probably need to review that and say, with our changing society today, is this the most viable? Are there other alternatives? We don't know, and until we have some opportunity to review and explore, we won't know. But I think certainly it would always help anybody to look at what has been and where they're going and how they're going to get there. This is the idea in asking colleges to develop a self-study, which from my point of view, is the most important part of the accreditation process. Because people look at themselves and say, well, look, we said we were going to do this, but to what extent are we really doing it? And I think this is a healthy kind of thing for anybody, whether it's an individual, an organization, an institution.
Edith, yesterday as we were talking a little bit, you indicated that you thought, you know, we may need to look at how we're delivering services to people today as a thing that might change. Perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I think there are major changes that are going to come about, which are going to change many things. Our education programs, probably, our delivery of services. In terms of delivery of services, I think we're going to have to recognize that with the economic crunch that we have, fields are going to be necessary because programs can't operate on the tax dollar in the public sector. And that means that we're going to have more volunteers to carry on programs. I think there's another thing that goes along with that, and that is that I think that the public agency may become a coordinator of services, because we cannot consider that the public agency has the potential for delivering all of the kind of services that people want. There are many other institutional groups that can contribute to the leisure life of people.
As it's kind of unusual to say that you're retired, but officially you are retired.
Yes.
But hearing about all of your current involvement that you retain in this profession, how are you kind of spending your retirement years now, and has your background in the leisure movement been of value to you in learning that adjustment?
Oh, yes, very much so. Because, well, I'd have to say, first of all, I retired because the university said I had to. They were in a financial difficulty, and so they reduced the retirement age, and anybody above that age had to retire. I had already decided that when I retired, which I had not planned at that moment, that I would continue professional work, because I found great satisfaction in working with my professional colleagues. I had always done volunteer work, and I knew that I would continue to do volunteer work. And then I have many interests. As I indicated earlier, I'm interested in dance, I'm interested in music and drama, and have an opportunity to participate in those things, and also in outdoor activities, which I'll have to admit I have reduced somewhat now. But on the whole, I think that I would say that many of my activities that I have done all my life, I like to do crafts. I always bring my needlepoint with me when I go to a convention, so at odd moments I can have something to occupy my hands when the activities of the meeting are not that interesting. And these things I continue regularly. And I think I've always felt that one should go along with the theory that activity helps to develop and continue mental activity, physical activity. And this is the way that you keep a totally vital person.
Are you involved in any way? I believe now you're living in Arizona.
Yes.
Are you involved in any way with any of the university activities or classes still in our profession?
Yes, I work as a volunteer, I would say, at the university, having the real privilege of working with the people there. I teach courses, not a course, but I teach classes at intervals, help them to develop their master's program, and do various and sundry things of that kind. I also work as a volunteer at the Association for the Blind, and do certain kinds of work with my church and other organizations of that kind. I've become moderately active in the American Association of University Women and have done some work with the legislative committee there, where we have a great deal of work to do in the state of Arizona to get certain kinds of programs that we think are important into operation. Some indication of that, of how much we need to do. Arizona is the only state in the union that does not have Medicaid or any alternative program for health for the indigent. So there's a great deal of work that's needed, and I think each person can find those things where whatever talents he has, he can use to help to promote and develop whatever is there.
Edith, I've heard it said on numerous occasions that we no longer in our profession have the giants that we formerly did. The Edith Balls, the George Jeltys, the Harold Myers, the Charlie Bright Bills, and others of that stature. Do you believe that the golden years, if I can use that term, of the recreation and park profession are behind us or ahead of us?
I think they're ahead of us. If we permit our young people to really develop and create the kind of climate that is necessary in our changing society, I don't think that we can hark back to people who have done certain kinds of things. It's the same thing exactly that we used to see, where recreation programs were activity-centered rather than person-centered. I think we need to translate that into all of our facets of professional development and into the programs that they in turn will develop for communities. It must be person-centered and have the potential for giving each individual the opportunity to find that thing which is most satisfying to him, her.
So, from one of the giants of our field, he feels that our future is not behind us, but still lies ahead. Edith, we appreciate so much sharing this time with you. I wonder, have you any final comments or words of wisdom for those people who will be attempting to follow in your footsteps in guiding the future of the recreation and park profession, other than those that you've already shared?
Probably not, except to re-emphasize that we ought to give each individual the opportunity to be innovative and creative in whatever area of this field that he or she is working in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Edith Ball, and thank you, Roger Brown.
Thank you, Edith.